3:47 a.m., Cape Coral, Florida. July 9th, 2026. A federal breach team pressed against the exterior wall of a beige duplex on Sandalwood Court. No lights on inside. No sound from the street. The garage door was still warm from a delivery van that had backed in 40 minutes earlier and not come out. The team did not go through the front door. They went through the utility room wall. What they found inside closed 125 days of federal investigation. It was a case prosecutors would later describe as among the most methodically constructed recruitment frauds the Gulf Coast had seen. 12 young women, all alive, all American citizens or permanent residents, reported missing from small towns between the Florida Panhandle and the Louisiana Bayou. The oldest was 28. The youngest, 22. A night shift nurse from Pensacola. A woman 3 weeks from her wedding, from a town called Houma. A sous-chef who had run the Friday dinner service at her family's restaurant in Gulfport every week for 4 years before she disappeared. Each one had answered a job posting. Each one had been told she was going to work in hospitality. Each one had been wrong. The break in this case didn't come from surveillance on the duplex, a tip line, an informant, or a wiretap. It came from a single line in a fentanyl indictment filed 600 miles away in Baton Rouge, a co-defendant's name attached to a Florida property address that nobody had connected to anything until an analyst read it twice. That analyst's name was Special Agent Renata Souza. She worked the financial intelligence desk at the DEA's New Orleans Field Division. She was reviewing secondary addresses on a fentanyl conspiracy case when she noticed the mismatch. It was a Wednesday afternoon in late May of 2026. She had a cup of coffee going cold on her desk. She flagged the entry and wrote 3 words in the margin of her case notes: "Does not fit." 6 weeks later, those 3 words sent a breach team through a wall in Florida. To understand what Souza found, you need to go back to what started it, the lie built into Coastal Meridian. Sometime in the fall of 2025, a small company called Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions began placing job listings on regional employment boards across the Gulf Coast. The listings looked professional. They offered positions in hotel concierge services, restaurant management, catering coordination, and event staffing. Salaries ranged from $42,000 to $58,000 annually. The listings mentioned travel opportunities. They mentioned a benefits package. They mentioned that applicants would need to sign a short-term relocation agreement to cover initial housing costs during a training period. That agreement was how the trap worked. It wasn't called a debt contract. It didn't look like one. It was framed as a standard onboarding document. But embedded in the language, in a subsection on page 4, written in .7 font, was a repayment clause. If the employee left the training program before 90 days, they owed the company a reimbursement for all relocation and housing costs incurred on their behalf. The total, by the time fees were added, came to just under $14,000 per person. $14,000. For a young woman making $42,000 a year, $14,000 she would owe before she had received a single paycheck. The people who ran Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions understood exactly what $14,000 meant to a 24-year-old from a Gulf Coast town. It meant you stayed. It meant you didn't make calls you weren't supposed to make. It meant that even if something felt wrong, the math of leaving felt worse. The operation had been running since at least October of 2025. By the time federal investigators pulled the full scope of it, the company had processed more than 40 applications. 12 women had been relocated. 12 had been transported to the Duplex on Sandalwood Court. None of them had reported to a hotel. None of them had started a training program. None of them had been paid. Their families had been told that onboarding had begun, that phones were restricted during the first 2 weeks, that a supervisor would be in touch. The families waited. Then they filed missing persons reports. Before the investigation had a name, before the task force existed, before any federal analyst had drawn a line between a drug case and a row of locked rooms in Cape Coral, there were just families. Families who had seen a daughter or a sister or a fiancé walk out a door toward what looked like a real opportunity, and then stop calling. The mother of the sous-chef from Gulfport described her daughter in a victim services interview that was summarized in court documents. She said her daughter had been trying to leave Gulfport for 2 years. Not because she didn't love the restaurant. She loved the restaurant. She loved the Friday service especially, the way the kitchen moved when it was full, the rhythm of it. But she wanted to see something different. She had applied to culinary management programs in New Orleans and Tampa. She had taken a course online in hospitality administration. When the Coastal Meridian listing appeared on an employment board, she checked regularly. It looked, in her mother's words, like exactly the kind of thing she had been working toward. Her mother said she remembers the phone call the day her daughter was offered the position. She said her daughter sounded like herself, excited but measured, the way she always was when something good happened, like she didn't want to use up the feeling too fast. She said they talked for almost an hour. Her daughter read her parts of the offer letter. They talked about the relocation clause and agreed it was standard. Her daughter said she'd looked up the company online and the website looked professional. The website had been built in 36 hours using a commercial site-building platform. The stock photographs had been licensed for $11 per image. The testimonials had been generated by an AI text tool and posted under names that did not belong to real people. The mother filed a missing persons report with the Harrison County Sheriff's Office on November 29, 2025. 22 days after her daughter had taken the job. That report sat in the Harrison County database for 6 weeks before a cross-jurisdictional search connected it to similar reports being logged in Florida, Alabama, and Louisiana. 6 weeks. For a woman who had walked into a company that did not exist, to work a job that was not real, in a building that no one outside the operation had yet identified. By January of 2026, the Lee County Sheriff's Office had 6 open missing persons cases, with 1 recurring pattern: young women, Gulf Coast origins, last known contact involving a job offer in hospitality. A detective named Marcus Reyes had flagged the overlap. He sent a summary to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. Foodle ran it up to the FBI's Tampa field office. An agent there opened an ancillary file and requested a financial background check on Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions. The company was clean. Registered in Florida in September of 2025. A single managing member, a man whose name appeared on the incorporation documents as Derek Alain Fontenot. No prior federal record. A prior misdemeanor in Louisiana from 2018, unrelated. A valid business license. A web presence that looked entirely professional, including stock photographs of smiling hotel concierges and a testimonials page that had been populated with AI-generated text. The FBI's Tampa office ran Fontenot's name against federal databases. Nothing significant surfaced. They ran the company address, a registered agent on a commercial street in Fort Myers, and found it was a mail forwarding service. Standard. Not illegal. Not unusual enough on its own to trigger a federal warrant. By February of 2026, the case had stalled. 6 missing women. A clean-looking company. a managing member who had not broken any law that anyone could yet document, an FBI agent who had a file open but no thread to pull. The strangest part of this case isn't what happened during the raid. It's what almost didn't happen at all. If Renata Souza had not been assigned to review co-defendant financial disclosures on the Baton Rouge fentanyl case, if she had not been the kind of analyst who reads footnotes, if she had not looked twice at a Florida property address attached to a man named Corey Ruel, a mid-level distributor in the fentanyl network who had nothing, on paper, to do with missing women or hospitality jobs, none of what followed would have been set in motion in time. Ruel's name appeared in the fentanyl indictment as a secondary co-conspirator. He had handled cash transfers for the network. His primary address was in Ascension Parish, Louisiana. His secondary address, noted in his financial disclosure as a rental property, was on Sandalwood Court, Cape Coral, Florida. Souza pulled the property records. The property had been leased in November of 2025. The lessee was not Corey Ruel. The lessee was a Florida LLC called Gulf Palmetto Real Estate Holdings. Gulf Palmetto had been registered in October of 2025. Its registered agent was the same Fort Myers mail forwarding service that Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions used. Two companies, same mail service, 1 month apart. One in Louisiana's fentanyl chain, one connected to missing women in Florida. Souza wrote a second note, flag for human side. She called the FBI's Tampa field office the following morning. The agent who answered was Special Agent Darnell Withers. He had the Coastal Meridian file open on his second monitor. When Souza read him the Sandalwood Court address, he went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That address is in my file." Within 48 hours, the case had a new designation. It was no longer an ancillary file. It was a joint DEA-FBI investigation with a task force designation and a command structure. The Tampa field office pulled in resources from the DEA's Miami Field Division. A lead prosecutor in the Southern District of Florida was read in. A separate financial crimes analyst began tracing the corporate chain connecting Gulf Palmetto to Coastal Meridian. The chain took 11 days to fully map. When it was done, it showed a structure deliberately built for legal insulation. Coastal Meridian handled recruitment. Gulf Palmetto handled the property. A third entity, a Louisiana-registered company called Pelican Transport and Logistics, handled the vans. All three companies were connected at the ownership level through a series of nominee shareholders, each of whom had been recruited through the same fentanyl network that Corey Ruel had been part of. The fentanyl operation had not created the human side scheme, but it had provided the infrastructure, the cash movement channels, the nominee networks, the shared mail forwarding services that the human side scheme had quietly borrowed and built on top of. This case is structurally different from most federal prosecutions. This wasn't a cartel running a side operation. It was a human trafficking scheme using a drug operations infrastructure as cover. The drug people didn't necessarily know what the property was being used for, and the people running the property had plausible deniability on the drug side. The federal task force spent 3 weeks carefully untangling who knew what. That distinction mattered enormously for the indictment. They could not charge someone on the fentanyl side for the Cape Coral operation unless they could document knowledge. What the court records would eventually show is that at least 2 individuals moved between both operations knowingly. One of them drove a van for Pelican Transport. The other had processed a payment from Coastal Meridian to Gulf Palmetto. Both are named in the 22-count indictment. I spent time going through the financial disclosure documents attached to this investigation, and one number kept pulling my attention back. The total cash flow through the Gulf Palmetto account between November 2025 and June 2026 was $112,000. For a company that supposedly held a single rental property generating approximately $2,000 per month in rental income, that number couldn't exist in a legitimate business. At $2,000 per month, 8 months of rental income would come to $16,000. The gap, $96,000 unaccounted for, is what the prosecution called the operational float, the money that kept the scheme running. While investigators were building the financial picture and preparing for physical surveillance, a separate strand of the operation was quietly being documented inside a windowless room on the second floor of the FBI's Tampa field office. A financial crimes analyst named Patricia Garland had been assigned to trace every transaction visible in the Gulf Palmetto account. What she found over 16 days of work was not dramatic. It was meticulous and mundane, the signature of a scheme designed to survive scrutiny. The payments came in from Coastal Meridian in amounts that ranged between $3,000 and $7,000 each, structured at irregular intervals. Never the same amount twice. Never a round number. The irregular patterning was intentional. It avoided the automated flags that consistent round number deposits would have triggered in standard bank monitoring software. Garland documented this in a 12-page memo that she submitted to the task force command on June 2nd. The memo noted that the patterning was consistent with training or coaching by someone with prior knowledge of how financial monitoring systems work. That observation was forwarded to the lead prosecutor as a potential element of the conspiracy charge. The total flow in and out of the Gulf Palmetto account over 8 months touched at least 7 different sub-accounts and 2 external LLCs that Garland had not yet been able to connect to named individuals. As of July 12th, that thread of the financial investigation was still open. 2 of the 7 sub-accounts were associated with routing numbers from a regional credit union in Metairie, Louisiana, that investigators had subpoenaed. The credit union's compliance department had cooperated fully. The account holders' identities were known to the task force and are sealed in the court record pending charging decisions. The task force established physical surveillance on Sandalwood Court on June 3, 2026. They used a rented property 2 doors down. 2 agents in rotating shifts. A camera mounted inside a utility service truck that stayed parked on the block for reasons a neighbor described to investigators as routine cable work. For 12 days, the surveillance produced almost nothing. The duplex appeared dormant. Blinds drawn. No movement visible from outside. Delivery vehicles stopped occasionally, but nothing unusual. The garage opened and closed. An SUV came and went, same driver, roughly every 3 days. The agents in the surveillance post kept logs that recorded exactly the quality of stillness specific to a structure that has been deliberately designed to look unoccupied from the outside. No light escaping from the edges of drawn blinds. No sound audible from the sidewalk. A trash receptacle placed at the curb on the correct collection day. A small detail, the kind of detail that signals someone is maintaining the appearance of a normal occupied residence. On the 8th day of surveillance, a team member noted that the exterior of the duplex had been recently repainted. The property records showed no permitted exterior work. The paint was uniform, a consistent beige that matched every other unit on the block with suspicious precision, not the slightly weathered variation that accumulates naturally on residential paint over years. Fresh, deliberate, the kind of aesthetic neutrality that is chosen, not arrived at. On the 12th day of surveillance, a deputy with the Lee County Sheriff's Office, working a separate patrol assignment in the area and not yet looped into the federal task force, ran a routine plate check on a white cargo van that backed into the Sandalwood Court garage at 3:21 a.m. The van had taken a series of unnecessary turns before reaching the street. The deputy noticed it. He ran the plate. The plate came back registered to Pelican Transport and Logistics. The deputy flagged it to his watch commander. The watch commander passed it to Fately. The Fately passed it to Tampa. Withers was in the office at 5:45 a.m. when the notification reached his inbox. He read Pelican Transport and Logistics and immediately called the task force command line. The map, as investigators would later put it, lit up. The plate match connected the van to the Baton Rouge fentanyl network. The fentanyl network connected to Corey Ruel. Ruel connected to Gulf Palmetto. Gulf Palmetto connected to the Sandalwood Court property. The Sandalwood Court property connected to Coastal Meridian. And Coastal Meridian had 6, then 9, then 12 open missing persons reports attached to its name in the CEDL database. What's most surprising about this investigation isn't how it ended. It's how close it came to never being connected at all. The fentanyl case, the missing persons reports, the financial chain, the physical surveillance. Each piece was being worked by a different agency, in a different city, with no shared database entry to pull them together. The connection existed only in a footnote in a Baton Rouge court filing that a New Orleans analyst happened to read carefully on a Wednesday afternoon. One footnote: 12 women. The task force had enough for an emergency warrant by June 18th. A federal magistrate signed it at 11:40 p.m. But the decision was made at the command level not to execute immediately. The concern was the front door camera. Surveillance footage showed a small exterior camera mounted above the front entry, angled to capture the approach from the street. Any team coming through the front door would be visible on that feed. If anyone inside was monitoring the feed, or if the feed was being recorded and reviewed remotely, a front door approach would give seconds of warning. In a confined space with 12 potential victims, seconds mattered. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Executing a no-knock warrant on a residential duplex with 12 civilians inside is one of the most operationally complex things a breach team can do. The risk of a panicked response, the risk of interior barriers, the risk of not knowing precisely where everyone is located. The task force spent 18 days after the warrant was signed developing an alternative approach. County building records, confirmed by covert inspection, showed the utility room on the north wall had no interior camera and no line of sight to the main rooms. The utility room was accessible from the side yard. A breach through that wall would place the team inside the structure, behind the front-facing camera, before anyone monitoring the feed would see movement. The plan required wall breach equipment that is not standard tactical kit. It required a quiet entry, not an explosive one, to avoid the noise signature that might trigger a response before the team was positioned. And it required a medical trailer staged close enough to receive multiple patients within minutes of entry, because the condition of the women inside was unknown. The staging point was a public marina 2 blocks east on Coronado Parkway. 11 federal agents. 4 Lee County deputies assigned as perimeter. A medical team with 2 paramedics and a trauma nurse. An HRT element from the FBI's Miami field office, 5 operators, who had driven down the previous afternoon and slept in shifts in a rented boat slip. The command decision to execute came at 2:58 a.m. on July 9th. At 3:47 a.m., the breach team reached the north wall of the duplex. The wall came down in under 90 seconds. The HRT operators moved through the utility room in a column, each spaced 3 feet apart, weapons raised at low ready. The utility room itself measured roughly 8 feet by 10. A water heater on the south wall. A shelf unit bolted to the north partition, which was the shared wall with the residential interior. The shelf had been loaded with cleaning supplies and folded tarps, the kind of visual clutter that slows a searching eye. The team moved around it in under 4 seconds. The interior door off the utility room opened inward. The first operator breached it with a single shoulder contact at low force, which was enough. The door had not been locked from inside. The hallway beyond was dark, narrow. The floor was tiled in a generic cream-colored ceramic that reflected the ambient light from the operator's mounted weapon lights in fragmented patterns along the walls. 2 doors on the left side of the hallway. 1 door at the far end. All closed. The team moved left first, which is the standard pattern when the threat axis is unknown and you are clearing from your point of entry outward. The first door opened into what the after-action report would describe as a common area. 2 folding tables, plastic chairs, a small television mounted high on one wall, powered off. Takeout containers on the tables, some recent enough to still smell of food. 3 women were in this room. They were awake. The after-action report notes, without elaboration, that they did not react to the entry with surprise. They reacted with stillness. The kind of stillness that, one of the operators told investigators later, did not look like calm. It looked like a learned response to sudden movement in that space. Put yourself in Special Agent Withers' position for a moment, standing at the command post at the marina, listening to the breach team's radio traffic, knowing that somewhere inside that building were 12 women who had been missing for as long as 125 days, and that the next 4 minutes would determine whether this operation ended with everyone alive. The team entered through the utility room. 2 rooms cleared in the first 45 seconds. A 3rd room, locked from the outside with a commercial-grade deadbolt, was breached with a hydraulic tool at the 4-minute mark. The lock had been installed on the exterior. That detail is in the breach team's after-action report. It is stated without elaboration. The lock had been installed on the exterior. 3 women were in that room. In the following 6 minutes, agents located and cleared the remaining sections of the duplex. 2 individuals were found in the structure. Neither was Fontenot. Both were taken into custody without incident. Firearms were recovered from a bedroom on the south side of the building. No shots were fired. The 12 women were located across 3 interior spaces. All 12 were alive. All 12 were ambulatory. All 12 were walked out of the duplex within the first 10 minutes of the breach, escorted by agents to the medical trailer, staged on the service road running parallel to Sandalwood Court. The medical team triaged all 12 at the trailer. Each received immediate assessment. The triage report logged the physical indicators consistent with prolonged confinement. 9 of the 12 were transported by ambulance to Lee Memorial Hospital. 3 were transported to Cape Coral Hospital. All 12 were admitted. The night shift nurse from Pensacola was the first to give a statement to a victim services coordinator. Her name in court documents is listed only by initials. She had been missing since March 5, 2026. 126 days. She asked the coordinator, before she asked anything else, whether her mother had been told she was alive. The coordinator said yes. What the case file does not capture, what the triage report and the after-action log and the prosecutor's case memo collectively fail to contain, is the specific quality of those first minutes outside. The medical trailer was parked on a service road that ran behind a line of residential garbage bins. The sky over Cape Coral at 4 in the morning in July is still full dark, but warm in a way that is different from the dark inside a building. Several of the women, per the trauma nurse's notes, stood at the open trailer door before going in. Just stood, not moving, not speaking, oriented toward the sky. The trauma nurse noted it in language that was clinical but not unkind. She wrote, "Several patients paused at point of egress, appeared to require a moment of outdoor orientation before entering the trailer. Standard practice, do not rush. Allow it." The nurse gave them the moment. All 12 came in. The woman from Homa, the bride-to-be, had been reported missing on March 12th. Her fiancé had driven to 4 different law enforcement offices in 2 states in the weeks after she disappeared, insisting each time that she had not left voluntarily. He was correct. She was 24 years old. She was transported to Lee Memorial and admitted under standard protocol. Her fiancé arrived at the hospital at 6:41 a.m. He had driven through the night from Louisiana after receiving a call from an FBI victim services coordinator at 2:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the breach, after the task force had determined that victim family notification could proceed without compromising operational security. The call had told him only that she had been located and that she was alive. It had given him an address. He drove 420 miles. In the hours between the breach and the unsealing of the indictment, the FBI's Victim Services Division was coordinating family notifications across 5 states. Each coordinator had a list. Each list had names, not the names of defendants, but the names of mothers and fathers and siblings and fiancés who had been waiting, in some cases since November of 2025, for a phone to ring with the right answer. Some of the calls were made before dawn. Some were made to numbers that had already been called 100 times by the families themselves, calling tip lines, calling detective desks, calling anyone who might have something new. A father in Pensacola received his call at 4:22 a.m. His daughter was the nurse. The coordinator's notes record that he said nothing for 11 seconds after being told she was alive. Then he said, "I knew it. I always knew it. I told them." He had told them. He had filed reports. He had sent emails to the FBI's tip line in February and March. He had called the Lee County Sheriff's Office. The record shows that each contact had been logged. Each had been noted. None had produced a direct link to the Coastal Meridian file before the Sousa connection was made, because his daughter's missing persons report had been filed in Escambia County, and the Fodal cross-jurisdictional flag had not yet absorbed Escambia County cases when he first called. His calls were in the system. They just weren't in the right system. The federal prosecutors unsealed a 22-count indictment the following morning, July 10, 2026. The lead defendant named in the indictment was Derek Elaine Fontenot, identified as the managing member of Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions and the primary architect of the recruitment scheme. Fontenot was not arrested at the Duplex. He was located at a motel in Biloxi, Mississippi at 6:14 a.m. on July 10th, approximately 8 hours after the Cape Coral breach. He was taken into custody by FBI agents from the New Orleans field office without incident. Fontenot's arrest at the Biloxi motel was not a coincidence of timing. The task force had been tracking his location through cell tower data authorized under the emergency warrant extension. On the night of July 8th, the night before the breach, Fontenot's phone had placed him at a location in Fort Myers. By 1 a.m. on July 9th, it had moved north and west, crossing into the Florida Panhandle and then into Mississippi by 4:15 a.m. The movement pattern suggested he had received some warning or had acted on a standing contingency. The task force cannot confirm which, and Fontenot has not provided any statement. What they can confirm is that he was driving away from Cape Coral at almost exactly the moment the breach team was pressing against the utility room wall. He made it 400 miles. FBI agents were already staged in Biloxi based on the cell tower progression. They had been positioned there since 2 a.m. A second arrest, Corey Ruel, on upgraded charges that now included conspiracy relating to the Cape Coral operation, was executed in Ascension Parish the same morning. 12 additional individuals are named in the indictment across various counts, including conspiracy, fraud in labor recruitment, and related federal charges. As of July 12, 2026, the date this reconstruction is current to, 4 of those individuals remained at large. Federal arrest warrants are active. Their names and photographs have been submitted to the Nanchik database. Here's the take that will probably draw some disagreement. The structural failure in this case is not fentanyl, and it's not the fentanyl network, and it's not any single investigator or agency. The failure is the gap between the missing persons database and the federal financial intelligence systems. 12 women were reported missing from Gulf Coast towns over a span of 4 months. 6 of those reports had been flagged by a single county detective who recognized the pattern. That pattern flag reached the FBI in January. The financial connection that actually broke the case wasn't found by the FBI. It was found by a DEA analyst reviewing a drug case, because she happened to be reading the same footnote that nobody in the human side investigation had been looking at. That is a systems failure. Not a failure of any individual investigator. Every person in this chain worked the information they had. It is a failure of the architecture that kept those information streams in separate channels until a chance overlap connected them. The common assumption is that federal agencies share data seamlessly and that missing persons cases get routed to the right desks automatically. The evidence in this case tells a different story. Renata Souza has not been publicly named in any of the press releases issued by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida. Federal press releases on joint operations typically credit agencies, not individuals. The case summary released on July 10th credited the DEA, the FBI, the Lee County Sheriff's Office, FDL, and the Southern District's prosecution team. Souza is not mentioned. The detail that cracked the case, the footnote, the mismatch, the 3 words she wrote in the margin, exists in the internal case documentation but not in the public record. The 22-count indictment charges range from conspiracy to commit wire fraud, to labor recruitment fraud, to related federal statutes. The charges carry maximum sentences ranging from 5 years on the lower counts to 20 years on the primary conspiracy charges. Fontenot's arraignment is scheduled for the week of July 21st. The financial investigation is ongoing. Federal prosecutors have indicated in court filings that asset forfeiture proceedings will address the 3 corporate entities, Coastal Meridian, Gulf Palmetto, and Pelican Transport, as instruments of the scheme. Combined assets identified so far include the Sandalwood Court Duplex, 2 vehicles, and approximately $142,000 in accounts linked to the Gulf Palmetto LLC. The money recovered represents a fraction of the estimated operational budget for the scheme. The remainder, prosecutors estimated at somewhere between $350,000 and $600,000, has not been traced to recoverable accounts. Where that money went is still an open question in the financial investigation. The 40-plus people who applied to Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions but were not ultimately transported to Cape Coral represent another thread that investigators have not yet fully traced. Some declined after initial contact. Some may have been screened out by the recruiters. At least 3 are women whose current status is listed in the FODI database as verified safe following investigative follow-up. The status of the remaining applicants in that pool is still being confirmed. The interview process that Coastal Meridian used to screen applicants is documented in the task force evidence file. It was conducted entirely by phone and video call. The recruiter, a woman who has been indicted on 2 counts of conspiracy and whose name is in the public record, would conduct a first-round call of approximately 20 minutes. Standard questions about prior work experience in customer service, comfort with travel, current living situation. That last question, current living situation, was not casual. Investigators determined through analysis of accepted versus rejected applications that women who described living alone, recently relocated, or with limited local family connections were advanced. Women who described established local networks, frequent family contact, or current partners in stable employment were deprioritized. The screening was for isolation. It was not asking whether you could do the job. It was asking whether you would be missed quickly. One detail that stayed with me when reading through the available case documentation: the Coastal Meridian website was still live as of July 10, 2026, the morning the indictment was unsealed, and Fontenot was arrested in Biloxi. The job listings were still posted. The stock photographs of smiling concierge workers were still there. The testimonials page was still populated with its AI-generated text. Someone at the web hosting company took the site down later that afternoon. Will this kind of scheme, recruitment fraud layered inside a legitimate-looking corporate structure, borrowing the back-office infrastructure of a drug network, appear again? Comment yes or no. The architecture is not complicated. The components are available. The legal insulation, as the task force's own documentation noted, was deliberately built. The specific players are in custody. The structure they built is not unique to them. As of July 12th, 4 individuals named in the indictment remain at large. The warrant is active. The financial trail has not been fully closed. The 40-odd applicants who contacted Coastal Meridian and did not end up on Sandalwood Court, their full accounting is still in progress. The 12 women admitted to Lee Memorial and Cape Coral Hospital on the morning of July 9th are receiving coordinated care. Their names are not in the public record. Victim services coordinators from the FBI and from the Florida Department of Children and Families are assigned to each case. Fontenot's attorney entered a not guilty plea on his behalf at a brief hearing on July 11th. His trial date has not been set. The duplex on Sandalwood Court is now a sealed federal crime scene. The deadbolt that was installed on the exterior of the locked room, the one the breach team removed with a hydraulic tool at the 4-minute mark, has been logged as physical evidence. The Coastal Meridian Hospitality Solutions website is offline. The job listings are gone. The testimonials page is gone. The stock photographs are gone. 4 defendants are still out there. $350,000 minimum is unaccounted for. One of the 12 victims has not yet been formally identified in Fordley's missing persons system. Her recovery is confirmed. Her identity is known to investigators, but the paperwork connecting her recovery to the original report has not yet been processed through the database. A clerical delay. The kind of thing that gets fixed in a week. Except that until it's resolved, she is still technically listed as missing. The network that put her there has been dismantled. The system that lists her as missing is still